Many people believe that atheism is based on reason and science, while religion is based on emotion and faith. But is atheism truly rational? In this video, I will show that atheism is not rational, is not based on science, and in fact is just another religious belief. Atheism is the belief that God does not exist. The word atheism comes from the Greek word atheos, meaning without God. Note that atheism is a belief, and like any other belief, it must be subject to rational examination. The atheist must provide logical arguments that strongly demonstrate the non-existence of God. If atheists are not equipped with these strong and logical arguments, then their belief is little more than blind faith. The dogma of atheism may be summarized as follows. There is no God. There is no objective truth. There is no ground for reason. There are no absolute morals. There is no ultimate value. There is no ultimate meaning. There is no eternal hope. Many people accept atheism without reason, but the standard arguments employed by various atheistic philosophers are as follows. The existence of God is incompatible with the existence of evil. God is a projection of man's imagination. Since God cannot be scientifically demonstrated, he cannot exist. People believe in God because they are culturally conditioned to do so. The idea of God is nonsensical, like the idea of a square circle. If God made the world, who made God? Since there is no evidence of God's existence, he does not exist. These objections have been adequately answered by a great number of Christian philosophers, and I'll provide just a brief summary here. The claim that God and evil are incompatible is an unproven assumption. Christians hold that the existence of God and evil are not only compatible, but that the existence of evil in fact proves the existence of God. This is because good must exist before evil can be understood as being the absence of good. For example, hate is the absence of love, sickness is the absence of health, sorrow is the absence of joy, and so on. Hence, for evil to exist, good must exist first. At any rate, the existence of God cannot be disproved based on an unproven assumption. Claiming that God is a projection of man's imagination does nothing to disprove the existence of God. Again, this is an unproven assumption. In this case, the assumption can only be confirmed by proving that God does not exist, leaving no alternative but for him to have been imagined. But how can someone disprove something that he believes does not exist? The premise, therefore, is logically flawed. To argue that God must be testable by scientific means is to apply a false criterion. Science is useful in testing a number of physical phenomena, but there is no reason why God should be considered to be testable by scientific methods. Also, the person who argues that all things must be tested by science is not able to apply the same test to the assertion itself, since the making of an argument is not a physical phenomenon. There are other examples as well. How does one test love, values, morals, logic, and beauty scientifically? The assumption that God must be scientifically testable is both arbitrary and self-refuting. The argument that people believe in God because they have been culturally conditioned to do so is one that cuts both ways. It could be equally argued that people who do not believe in God have been culturally conditioned to not believe. Again, the argument is no more than an unproven theory, and a tenuous one at best. There are countless examples of people who have chosen to believe or not believe in God, contrary to their culture and upbringing. Asserting that the idea of God is nonsensical does not make it so. The assertion itself lacks both evidence and rationale. Why is the idea of God nonsensical? What laws of logic are violated? The assertion is arbitrary and without foundation. The problem of where God came from is not a reasonable basis for rejecting the existence of God. The argument assumes that everything must have a cause, but this is only true of created things. Since God is the creator of all things, he does not need to have a first cause. Christians argue that God has always existed. While it is hard for finite man to imagine the existence of an infinite and eternal being, nevertheless it is entirely possible. The argument, however, is more appropriately applied to the concept of an uncaused universe. From both a scientific and a logical perspective, it is unreasonable to expect that mindless matter created itself out of nothing, or has always existed. There is ample evidence to support the existence of God, as discussed in another video in this series. Atheists who accept only direct physical evidence for the existence of a spiritual being are placing an unreasonable test on the evidence. For example, no one can see the wind, but we know that it exists by the effects that it creates. The fact that we can't see God does not mean that he doesn't exist, any more than not seeing the wind means that it doesn't exist. The arguments of atheism do not stand up to rational analysis. They are composed of presumptions and theories lacking in evidential support and logic. Atheists believe that what they cannot see does not exist. No one, however, can prove that God does not exist, because that would require having all possible knowledge. The atheist would need to have infinite knowledge throughout all time and be everywhere at the same time to be absolutely sure of everything. In reality, the atheist would need to be God in order to prove that there is no God. Atheism, therefore, is self-refuting. That is, it fails to conform to its own criteria of validity or acceptability. Atheists hope that God does not exist, regardless of the evidence. Rather than offering a philosophy of life, they reveal instead a predetermination to deny the existence of God by whatever means. Anyone who rejects the existence of God must believe the following creed: matter is eternal, or else created itself out of nothing. Matter without life created life. Matter without mind created mind. Matter without intelligence created intelligence. Matter without morals created morals. Matter without conscience created conscience. Matter without order or purpose created order and purpose. This creed is contrary to the known laws of physics. It shows that atheism is not based on science, but on wishful thinking, on a kind of science fantasy. Atheism is not rational because it is impossible to prove that God does not exist. The principal arguments put forward by atheists to disprove the existence of God are invariably based on unproven assumptions and unreasonable tests. No matter what criteria the atheists employ, there will always remain the possibility that God exists outside of their knowledge and beyond the confines of their naturalistic view of the world. Atheism not only fails to prove its case, it also fails to disprove the evidence for the existence of God. In reality, there is abundant evidence to support the view that the cosmos was created by an intelligent, purposeful, and supernatural being. It is not enough for atheists to dismiss this evidence out of hand simply because, by their own definition, there is nothing to investigate. Saying that God does not exist does not make it so. It is more reasonable to believe in God because the existence of this life is impossible to understand without God.